Sarah Martinez had always been good at blending in. At 32, she possessed the kind of unremarkable appearance that made her perfect for her line of work. Average height, brown hair that she could style a dozen different ways, and the ability to shift her entire demeanor with a simple change of posture. Tonight, she sat at the corner of Murphy's bar wearing jeans and a simple black sweater, nursing a club soda while she waited for her contact. The mission was supposed to be routine intelligence gathering. Her handler had arranged a meeting with a former military contractor who claimed to have information about weapons trafficking through the port city. Sarah had been working undercover operations for the Defense Intelligence Agency for 8 years, specializing in counterterrorism and organized crime. Her official cover was as a freelance journalist, which gave her the flexibility to travel and ask questions without raising suspicion. Murphy's bar was the kind of place where conversations could disappear into the general din of clinking glasses and sports commentary. The lighting was dim enough to obscure faces, and the clientele minded their own business. Sarah had chosen a seat that gave her clear sight lines to both entrances and positioned her back to the wall. Old habits from her training at Fort Bragg died hard. She checked her watch again. Her contact was now 20 minutes late. In her experience, this could mean several things. He was being cautious and conducting counter-surveillance. He had gotten cold feet, or something had gone wrong. She gave him another 10 minutes before she would abort the meeting and report back to her handler. The bar was moderately busy for a Thursday night. A group of college students occupied the pool table, their laughter cutting through the ambient noise. Several regulars sat at the bar itself, engaged in the kind of slow, steady drinking that suggested they had nowhere else to be. Sarah had been observing the room since she arrived, cataloging faces and behaviors as she had been trained to do. That's when she noticed him. He sat 3 stools down from the end of the bar, a large man in his 40s with the kind of build that suggested either current or former military service. His posture was too rigid for a civilian, and his eyes moved across the room in patterns that spoke of professional awareness. More concerning was the way his attention kept returning to her table. Sarah had developed an instinct for when she was being watched, a sixth sense honed through years of operating in hostile environments. This man wasn't just casually looking around the bar. He was studying her with the kind of focused attention that made her hand unconsciously drift toward the concealed carry weapon holstered at her hip. She decided to test her theory. Rising from her table, she walked toward the restroom, taking a route that would require her to pass near the bar. As she moved, she used the mirror behind the bar to monitor his reaction. His head turned to follow her movement, confirming her suspicions. In the narrow hallway leading to the restrooms, Sarah quickly assessed her options. The back exit was 30 feet away, but it led into an alley she hadn't scouted. The front entrance meant walking past her potential tail. Her training kicked in, and she began formulating contingency plans. When she returned to her seat, the man at the bar had shifted position. He was now facing her direction more directly, no longer making any pretense of casual observation. Sarah felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with the recognition of imminent danger. She had been in enough hostile situations to trust her instincts completely. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick message to her handler. Contact no-show. Possible compromise. Extracting in 10. The response came back immediately. Copy. Safe House Alpha available. Sarah finished her club soda slowly, using the time to memorize the locations of every person in the bar and plan her exit strategy. The man at the bar had ordered another drink, but wasn't touching it. Professional surveillance often involved long periods of waiting, and experienced operatives learned to maintain their cover even when their target was mobile. As she stood to leave, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The man's jacket had shifted slightly as he turned, revealing the distinctive outline of a shoulder holster. This was no longer just surveillance. Someone had sent an armed operative to either capture or eliminate her. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. Had her cover been blown? Was this connected to her current mission or something from her past? In her line of work, she had made enemies across multiple continents. Former targets of her operations included arms dealers, terrorist financiers, and corrupt government officials. Any one of them might have the resources and motivation to track her down. She moved toward the front entrance, maintaining the casual pace of someone who had simply finished their drink and was heading home. Her peripheral vision tracked the man at the bar, who was now reaching for his wallet as if preparing to pay his tab. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Sarah pushed through the front door and into the cool night air. The street was moderately busy with late evening foot traffic, which would provide both cover and complicate any potential confrontation. She turned left toward where she had parked her rental car, but instead of heading directly there, she took a route that would let her use storefront windows as mirrors to monitor her six. The man emerged from the bar 30 seconds later. He moved with purpose now, no longer bothering to maintain the pretense of casualness. Sarah could see his reflection in a shop window across the street as he fell into step behind her, maintaining a distance of about 50 yards. Her rental car was parked 2 blocks away, but Sarah had no intention of leading her tail directly to it. Instead, she took a series of turns that would let her assess his capabilities and intentions. A skilled operative would maintain surveillance through multiple direction changes. An amateur would either lose her or reveal themselves by following too closely. This man was definitely professional. He adjusted his distance and changed his pace naturally, using other pedestrians and parked cars for concealment. Sarah noted that he was speaking into what appeared to be a hands-free phone device, which suggested he wasn't working alone. The situation was escalating beyond a simple surveillance operation. 3 blocks from the bar, Sarah made her decision. She couldn't lead this team to her safe house or her vehicle. She needed to either lose them or neutralize the threat. Given that they appeared to be armed and potentially coordinating with additional personnel, evasion seemed like the safer option. Sarah turned into a narrow alley between 2 downtown buildings. It was a calculated risk. The confined space would limit her options, but would also force any pursuit into a predictable path. If this was going to become a confrontation, she wanted to choose the ground. The alley connected to a parallel street, but halfway through, there was a fire escape ladder that could provide an alternate route. Sarah had scouted multiple escape routes in the area as part of her operational preparation. Now those preparations might save her life. She reached the fire escape and was beginning to climb when she heard rapid footsteps behind her. Her pursuer had abandoned stealth in favor of speed. Sarah looked back to see the man entering the alley, his hand now clearly visible inside his jacket gripping what was undoubtedly a weapon. "Stop right there," he called out, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't immediately place. "We just want to talk." Sarah continued climbing. In her experience, people who just wanted to talk didn't follow you into dark alleys while armed. Her training had taught her that the moment someone drew a weapon, the situation moved beyond negotiation into survival mode. She reached the first landing of the fire escape just as the man below began climbing after her. Sarah could see the street on the other side of the building through gaps between structures. If she could reach the roof, she might be able to cross to an adjacent building and find another way down. The man climbing behind her was slower, but determined. Sarah could hear him speaking into his communication device again, presumably coordinating with other team members. The fact that they had multiple personnel suggested this was a well-planned operation, not a crime of opportunity. As Sarah reached the second landing, she heard car doors slamming on the street she had originally been walking. Her pursuers were positioning additional assets to cut off her escape routes. This level of coordination indicated serious resources and professional planning. Someone very much wanted her captured or killed. Sarah's mind cataloged her options as she continued climbing. She carried a concealed pistol, but engaging in a firefight in the middle of a downtown area would bring police attention that could compromise her mission and potentially expose her true identity. Her training emphasized avoiding contact whenever possible, but sometimes situations forced your hand. She reached the roof access door and found it unlocked, a small piece of good fortune in an increasingly complicated night. The roof opened onto a broader view of the downtown area, and Sarah could see the layout of surrounding buildings. 2 blocks east, there was a 24-hour parking garage that would provide multiple exit routes and the possibility of acquiring alternative transportation. Behind her, she could hear her pursuer reaching the upper levels of the fire escape. Sarah moved across the rooftop toward the adjacent building, whose roof was slightly lower and accessible with a short jump. As she prepared to make the leap, she heard the roof access door bang open behind her. "Last warning," the man's voice called across the rooftop. "Stop and turn around slowly." Sarah jumped to the adjacent roof and rolled to absorb the impact. As she came up in a crouch, she saw muzzle flashes from where she had been standing moments before. The time for evasion had passed. These people were shooting to kill. Sarah drew her weapon as she moved toward the far edge of the building. She could see another fire escape that would take her down to street level near the parking garage. But first, she needed to slow down her pursuers. She turned and fired 2 quick shots at the roof access door on the building behind her, not trying to hit anyone but rather to force them to take cover and think twice about continuing the pursuit. The shots echoed through the downtown area, and Sarah knew she had perhaps minutes before police sirens would fill the night. As she reached the fire escape, Sarah could see black SUVs moving through the streets below, their occupants undoubtedly coordinating with the team on the rooftops. This was a major operation, and she was clearly the primary target. The question was whether they wanted her alive or dead, and at this point, she wasn't sure which option would be worse. Sarah began her descent down the fire escape, moving as quickly as possible while maintaining her balance. Below, she could see pedestrians on the sidewalk starting to react to the sound of gunfire. Some were running, others were pulling out phones to call 911. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Halfway down the fire escape, Sarah heard boots on the metal above her. At least one pursuer had made the jump between buildings and was following her down. She looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the night sky, and this time she didn't hesitate to return fire. The figure ducked back, giving Sarah the time she needed to reach the street level. She dropped the final 8 feet to the sidewalk and immediately began moving toward the parking garage. Behind her, she could hear shouting and the sound of multiple people on the fire escape. The parking garage was busy enough to provide cover, with cars moving in and out even at this late hour. Sarah made her way to the stairwell, planning to work her way up several levels before acquiring a vehicle. Hot wiring cars was a skill she had learned early in her training, though she preferred to avoid theft when possible. As she climbed the concrete stairs, Sarah tried to piece together what had happened. Someone had blown her cover and tracked her to the meeting location. The level of resources being deployed suggested either a foreign intelligence service or a very well-funded criminal organization. Either way, her current mission was compromised, and her immediate focus needed to be survival and extraction. On the 3rd level of the garage, Sarah found what she was looking for: an older sedan parked in a corner spot with minimal security systems. She had the car started within 90 seconds and was moving toward the exit when she saw the black SUVs converging on the garage entrance. Sarah drove toward the exit at a normal pace, hoping to blend in with legitimate traffic. As she approached the exit booth, she could see armed men taking positions near the street. They were setting up a checkpoint, planning to stop and search every vehicle leaving the garage. This left Sarah with limited options. She could try to ram through the checkpoint, but that would likely result in a high-speed chase through city streets with civilian casualties. She could abandon the car and try to escape on foot, but the garage was now surrounded. Or she could try a different approach entirely. Sarah pulled the car into a parking space and turned off the engine. Sometimes the best way to escape a trap was to not be where your enemies expected you to be. She got out of the car and walked to the stairwell, but instead of going down, she went up to the roof level. The garage roof provided an excellent view of the operation below. Sarah counted at least 12 personnel positioned around the building, with more arriving every minute. Radio chatter echoed up from the street as they coordinated their search. This was definitely a professional military or intelligence operation. Sarah used her phone to contact her handler again, but this time she used an emergency communication protocol that would immediately alert her entire chain of command. Broken arrow, she typed, using the code phrase for an agent under active hostile pursuit. Multiple hostiles, professional operation, cover blown, require immediate extraction. The response was immediate. Extraction team en route. ETA 20 minutes. Maintain position and avoid contact. 20 minutes felt like a lifetime when you were surrounded by people trying to kill you. But Sarah had been in worse situations. She found a position behind an air conditioning unit that provided both concealment and a view of the surrounding area. Now it was a waiting game. Below, she could hear the search teams working their way through the garage level by level. They were being thorough and systematic, which meant it would be at least 15 minutes before they reached the roof. Sarah checked her ammunition and settled in to wait. As she lay in position, Sarah's mind wandered to how she had ended up in this situation. The meeting at Murphy's bar should have been routine intelligence gathering. Instead, it had turned into a running firefight through downtown streets. Someone had wanted her at that location tonight, and it hadn't been her contact. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This had been a setup from the beginning. Someone with access to her operational planning had arranged for her to be at Murphy's bar at a specific time. The missing contact wasn't late or scared. He had never been coming at all. Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest. Someone within her own organization had betrayed her. The list of people with access to her mission details was very short, and she was going to have some very difficult conversations when she got out of this situation. If she got out of this situation, the sound of boots on concrete was getting closer. Sarah gripped her weapon and prepared for what might be her final stand on a parking garage roof in a city whose name she barely knew. But she had been in impossible situations before, and she had always found a way to survive. Tonight would be no different. The extraction helicopter appeared exactly 20 minutes after Sarah had sent her emergency signal, but by then, the situation on the ground had changed dramatically. The hostile forces had discovered her abandoned rental car and were systematically searching every level of the parking garage. Sarah could hear their coordinated movements as they swept through the structure below her position. From her concealment behind the air conditioning unit, Sarah watched the black helicopter approach from the east, flying without lights in what was clearly a military stealth configuration. The aircraft bore no identifying markings, which was standard protocol for covert extraction operations. Her handler had mobilized serious resources to get her out of this situation. The helicopter settled onto the garage roof with professional precision, its rotors never fully stopping. Two figures in tactical gear emerged from the aircraft, moving with the fluid efficiency of special operations personnel. Sarah recognized the lead figure as Marcus Webb, a former Delta Force operator who now worked extraction operations for the agency. "Martinez, time to go," Webb shouted over the rotor noise, using hand signals to indicate she should move to the aircraft immediately. "We've got about 30 seconds before the hostiles reach this level." Sarah sprinted toward the helicopter, keeping low to avoid the rotor wash. As she reached the aircraft, she could hear the stairwell door burst open behind her. Automatic weapons fire erupted across the rooftop, bullets sparking off concrete and metal surfaces around them. Webb returned fire with his assault rifle while Sarah dove into the helicopter. The second extraction team member, whom Sarah didn't recognize, laid down suppressing fire from the aircraft's mounted weapon system. The hostile forces were forced to take cover, giving the helicopter the seconds it needed to lift off. As they rose above the city skyline, Sarah could see the full scope of the operation that had been mounted against her. There were at least 6 black SUVs positioned around the parking garage, with additional vehicles blocking nearby streets. Whoever had set this trap had resources comparable to a government intelligence service. "Any idea who wants you dead?" Webb asked through the aircraft's communication system as they flew toward what Sarah assumed was a safe house outside the city. "Working on that," Sarah replied, her mind already analyzing the operational details that had led to this situation. "Someone with access to my mission planning set me up." The meeting was fake from the beginning. Webb nodded grimly. Internal security breaches were every intelligence officer's nightmare. The list of people who could have compromised Sarah's operation was small, but each name on that list represented years of trusted collaboration. Someone she had worked with, eaten meals with, and trusted with her life had just tried to have her killed. The helicopter flew for 40 minutes before landing at a rural airstrip where a small jet was waiting. Sarah recognized the aircraft as one of the agency's unmarked transportation assets, capable of reaching any destination in North America without filing flight plans that could be tracked by hostile intelligence services. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked as they boarded the jet. "Safe house in Montana," Webb replied. "Isolated location where we can debrief properly and figure out who compromised your operation. Your handler wants a full tactical debrief within 12 hours. As the jet lifted off, Sarah settled into one of the comfortable leather seats and tried to process what had happened. In 8 years of covert operations, she had never encountered a betrayal this close to home. Foreign intelligence services and criminal organizations were occupational hazards, but having someone within her own organization try to eliminate her was a different category of threat entirely. The flight to Montana gave Sarah time to think through the operational details that might reveal the identity of her betrayer. The meeting at Murphy's Bar had been arranged through a secure communication channel that only 3 people had access to: her handler, her backup handler, and the regional operations coordinator. The timing and location had been finalized just 6 hours before the meeting, which meant the leak had come from someone with real-time access to her operational planning. Sarah had worked with her primary handler, David Chun, for 4 years. He had been her lifeline during operations in Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia. The idea that Chun might betray her seemed impossible, but Sarah's training had taught her that anyone could be compromised under the right circumstances. Money, blackmail, ideological conversion, or simple career advancement had turned trusted agents before. Her backup handler, Janet Morrison, was relatively new to the position but had an exemplary record. She had worked her way up through the intelligence community over 15 years, specializing in counterintelligence operations. If Morrison was dirty, she would have had multiple opportunities to compromise other operations before tonight. The regional operations coordinator, Colonel James Harrison, was a 20-year military intelligence veteran who had transitioned to civilian intelligence work after retiring from the Army. Harrison had oversight of multiple operations across the southeastern United States and would have had access to Sarah's mission parameters through his administrative role. Each of these individuals had the access and opportunity to compromise her operation. Determining which one had betrayed her would require careful investigation and probably some very uncomfortable confrontations. But first, Sarah needed to survive long enough to conduct that investigation. The jet landed at a small airstrip in rural Montana as dawn was breaking over the Rocky Mountains. The safe house was a comfortable log cabin situated on several hundred acres of private land, with sight lines that extended for miles in every direction. It was the kind of location where approaching vehicles could be spotted long before they posed a threat. Sarah's handler, David Chun, was waiting at the safe house when they arrived. His presence surprised her, since he was supposed to be coordinating search efforts for her missing contact back at headquarters. The fact that he had traveled to Montana suggested either genuine concern for her safety or a need to control the narrative of what had happened. "Sarah, thank God you're safe," Chun said as she entered the cabin. His relief appeared genuine, but Sarah's recent experience had taught her to trust no one completely. "We need to go through everything that happened from the beginning. Someone with high-level access set you up, and we need to find them before they try again." Sarah spent the next 3 hours providing a detailed account of the evening's events, from her arrival at Murphy's Bar through the firefight and extraction. Chun took extensive notes and asked probing questions about timing, personnel, and operational procedures. His questions seemed designed to help identify the source of the leak rather than to deflect suspicion from himself. "The level of coordination suggests foreign intelligence involvement," Chun said after reviewing Sarah's account. "Domestic criminal organizations don't typically have the resources to mount this kind of operation. We're looking at either Russian SVR, Chinese MSS, or possibly Iranian intelligence." "How would a foreign service get access to our operational planning?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "They would need someone on the inside," Chun admitted. "Someone with access to your mission details who could pass information to hostile intelligence services. We're conducting a full security review of everyone who had knowledge of your operation." Sarah studied Chun's face as he spoke, looking for any sign of deception or guilt. His expression remained professionally neutral, but she noticed he avoided making direct eye contact when discussing the internal investigation. It was a subtle tell, but one that raised her suspicions. That afternoon, Sarah received an encrypted message on her secure communication device. The message came from an address she didn't recognize, but it contained operational codes that indicated it was from someone within the intelligence community. "The trap was set from inside your organization," the message read. "Chun has been compromised for at least 6 months. Trust no one at your current location. Extract yourself immediately, and make contact through alternative channels." Sarah stared at the message, her mind racing through the implications. If Chun had been compromised, then her presence at the safe house was not protection but continued danger. The person she had trusted with her life for 4 years might be preparing to finish what had been started at Murphy's Bar. Sarah deleted the message and began planning her escape from the safe house. She couldn't confront Chun directly without more evidence, and She couldn't trust the other personnel at the location if the compromise went deeper than just one individual. Her only option was to disappear and conduct her own investigation. That evening, Sarah excused herself to get some rest, claiming exhaustion from the previous night's events. Instead, she began preparing for an unauthorized departure from the safe house. She gathered her equipment, including her weapon and emergency cache, and studied the terrain around the cabin through her room's window. The safe house was surrounded by forest, which would provide concealment, but would also make movement difficult in the darkness. Sarah estimated it was at least 20 miles to the nearest town, where she might be able to acquire transportation without alerting Chen's team. At 2 in the morning, Sarah slipped out of the cabin through a bathroom window. She had disabled the motion sensor in her room earlier and was confident she could reach the tree line without triggering the external security systems. The night was clear and cold, with enough moonlight to navigate without using artificial light that might reveal her position. Sarah moved through the forest with the stealth techniques she had learned during her initial training at Fort Bragg. She avoided dry branches and clearings, staying within the tree cover and moving in a pattern that would make tracking difficult. After 2 hours of careful progress, she reached a ridge that overlooked the cabin. From her elevated position, Sarah could see activity around the safe house. Vehicles were arriving, and personnel were moving with purpose rather than the relaxed postures of a normal security rotation. They had discovered her absence and were mobilizing to find her. Sarah used a pair of binoculars she had taken from the cabin to observe the response to her disappearance. Through the lenses, she could see Chen coordinating with at least 8 additional personnel. 2 teams were preparing to enter the forest, using tracking equipment that suggested they were prepared for an extended search operation. More concerning was the arrival of a helicopter that settled onto the cleared area near the cabin. Sarah could see armed personnel disembarking from the aircraft, their equipment and movements indicating military special operations training. This was not a rescue operation. This was a manhunt. Sarah continued moving through the forest, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the search teams. Her destination was a small town called Cedar Falls, which was approximately 15 miles southeast of the safe house. If she could reach the town and acquire transportation, she might be able to disappear completely and begin her own investigation into who had betrayed her. The terrain was challenging, with steep ridges and dense undergrowth that forced Sarah to move more slowly than she would have preferred. Behind her, she could occasionally hear the sound of helicopters conducting aerial searches, their searchlights sweeping through the forest canopy. The search was comprehensive and professional, confirming her suspicions that Chun was working with hostile intelligence services. As dawn approached, Sarah reached the outskirts of Cedar Falls. The town was small enough that strangers would be noticed, but she needed to risk exposure to acquire transportation and communication access. Her first priority was finding a secure way to contact trusted personnel within her organization who could help her determine the extent of the compromise. Sarah approached the town carefully, using a delivery truck's early morning route to provide cover as she moved between buildings. Cedar Falls appeared to be a typical rural Montana community, with a main street lined with small businesses and residential areas spreading out toward the surrounding farmland. She found what she was looking for at the town's small bus station, a payphone that would allow her to make untraceable calls. Sarah used a prepaid calling card she kept for emergencies to contact a secure number at CIA headquarters in Langley. The number connected to a duty officer who could route messages to specific personnel without going through normal administrative channels. "This is Agent Martinez, badge number 7749, Sarah said when the duty officer answered. "I need to speak with Deputy Director Richardson immediately. This is a Code Black emergency." Code Black was the designation for an agent under active hostile pursuit with suspected internal compromise. It would trigger immediate protocols for isolating the agent's operational details and conducting a full security review of everyone with access to their information. "Stand by, Agent Martinez," the duty officer replied. "Deputy Director Richardson is being contacted now." While she waited, Sarah observed the town around her. Cedar Falls was beginning its morning routine, with commuters heading to work and businesses opening for the day. The normalcy of the scene contrasted sharply with the deadly game of cat and mouse that had been playing out in the surrounding forest. Martinez, what's your situation? Deputy Director Richardson's voice came through the phone after a few minutes. Richardson was a career intelligence officer who had worked his way up through the operational ranks before moving into management. If anyone could be trusted to handle a compromised operation, it was Richardson. Sarah provided a brief summary of the events since Murphy's Bar, including her suspicions about Chun and her escape from the safe house. Richardson listened without interruption, asking only clarifying questions about specific details. We've been monitoring some unusual communication patterns from Chin's operation, Richardson said after Sarah finished her report. Your situation confirms our suspicions that we have a serious internal security problem. I'm sending a clean extraction team to your location immediately. Trust no one else until you're back at headquarters. How do I know the extraction team won't be compromised too? Sarah asked. The paranoia was necessary given the circumstances, but it made operational planning extremely difficult. Because I'm personally selecting the team from personnel who have had no contact with your current operation, Richardson replied. They'll identify themselves with the code phrase Montana Sunrise. Anyone else approaching you should be considered hostile. Sarah agreed to wait at a predetermined extraction point on the outskirts of town. As she hung up the phone, she noticed a black SUV moving slowly down the main street of Cedar Falls. The vehicle's occupants appeared to be scanning the area systematically, suggesting that Chin's search had expanded beyond the forest. Sarah moved away from the bus station and toward the extraction point, using side streets and alleys to avoid the main thoroughfares where the search vehicles were operating. The extraction point was an abandoned gas station on the eastern edge of town, which would provide both concealment and multiple escape routes if the situation went wrong. As she waited at the gas station, Sarah reflected on how quickly her world had changed. 24 hours ago, she had been preparing for a routine intelligence meeting. Now she was a fugitive from her own organization, unsure who could be trusted, and running from people who had been her colleagues and friends. The sound of an approaching helicopter made Sarah duck behind the gas station's derelict building. Through a broken window, she could see a military aircraft circling the area, its crew probably using thermal imaging to search for her heat signature. The technology was sophisticated enough to detect human presence even through building materials, which meant her concealment was only temporary. Sarah was preparing to move to a different location when she heard the sound of vehicles approaching the gas station. Through the window, she could see two black SUVs pulling into the station's parking area. Armed personnel were deploying from both vehicles, moving with the tactical precision of military special operations forces. This was not the extraction team Richardson had promised. These were Chin's people, and they had found her. Sarah crouched behind the abandoned gas station's concrete wall as Chin's tactical team spread out around the building. Through gaps in the structure, she could count at least 6 armed operatives, all moving with professional coordination. Their equipment included thermal imaging devices, which meant they probably already knew her exact location within the building. She had perhaps 60 seconds before they completed their tactical positioning and moved to capture or kill her. Sarah's mind raced through her limited options. The building had 2 exits, both of which were now covered by hostile forces. The windows were too small to provide escape routes, and the roof was too exposed to offer concealment from the helicopter circling overhead. Sarah checked her ammunition. She had 17 rounds remaining in her primary weapon and 1 spare magazine. Against 6 operatives with military equipment and air support, those resources would not last long in a prolonged engagement. She needed to even the odds quickly or find an alternative solution. The gas station's underground storage tanks provided her with an idea that was either brilliant or suicidal. The facility had been abandoned for several years, but the fuel storage infrastructure was still intact. If she could create a significant explosion, it might eliminate the immediate threat and provide cover for her escape. Sarah moved toward the station's maintenance area, where she located the access points for the underground fuel system. Years of disuse had left the tanks partially filled with volatile fumes that would ignite explosively with the right trigger. She needed something to create an ignition source with a delay that would give her time to reach minimum safe distance. Outside, she could hear the tactical team communicating through their radio systems. They were preparing for a coordinated assault on the building, probably planning to take her alive for interrogation. Sarah had no intention of letting that happen. Too many people had already died because of the information she possessed, and She wouldn't allow herself to be used as leverage against her remaining allies. Sarah found what she needed in the station's utility room, an old electric timer connected to a fluorescent light fixture. With some modification, she could use the timer to create a delayed ignition source. The work required delicate handling of both electrical components and fuel vapors, but Sarah's technical training included improvised explosives construction. As she worked, Sarah could hear boots approaching the building's exterior walls. The tactical team was moving into final assault positions. She estimated she had perhaps 30 seconds to complete her improvised device and reach the building's far corner, which offered the best protection from the coming explosion. The timer mechanism clicked into place, and Sarah set it for a 45-second delay. She moved toward the building's rear corner, putting as much concrete and steel between herself and the fuel storage area as possible. Through the broken windows, she could see muzzle flashes as the tactical team began their assault. The explosion, when it came, exceeded Sarah's expectations. The entire gas station disappeared in a fireball that rose 300 feet into the air, and the shock wave shattered windows in buildings half a mile away. The blast threw Sarah against the concrete wall hard enough to leave her dazed and disoriented, but the corner position had protected her from the worst of the explosion. When Sarah regained her senses, the tactical team and their vehicles were gone, consumed by the explosion along with most of the gas station structure. The helicopter had been caught in the blast radius and crashed in a field adjacent to the station, its crew presumably dead or seriously injured. Sarah had eliminated the immediate threat, but she had also announced her location to every law enforcement agency in the region. Sarah struggled to her feet, her ears ringing from the explosion and her body aching from the impact with the concrete wall. Blood was running from a cut on her forehead, and her left shoulder felt like it might be dislocated. But she was alive and mobile, which was more than could be said for Chen's assassination team. In the distance, Sarah could hear sirens approaching from multiple directions. The explosion had been visible for miles, and emergency responders would be converging on the scene within minutes. She needed to be far away before they arrived, both to avoid questions she couldn't answer and to prevent civilian casualties if Chun sent additional teams. Sarah moved away from the destroyed gas station, using a drainage ditch to provide concealment as she headed toward a wooded area east of the town. The cover would slow her progress, but it would also make her harder to track if Chun had additional surveillance assets in the area. As she moved through the forest, Sarah tried to assess the full scope of the betrayal she was facing. Chen had mobilized significant resources to eliminate her, including military personnel and equipment that suggested backing from a foreign intelligence service. The operation was too large and sophisticated to be a simple case of one compromised agent. Sarah's secure phone buzzed with an incoming message. The caller ID showed Deputy Director Richardson's emergency contact number, but Sarah hesitated before answering. If Chun could compromise her handler and operational security, he might also have access to Richardson's communication systems. Martinez, where the hell are you? Richardson's voice was tense with urgency. We're tracking massive emergency response activity in Cedar Falls. Did you just blow up a gas station? The extraction team you sent tried to kill me, Sarah replied cautiously. How do I know this communication is secure? Because I never sent an extraction team, Richardson said grimly. I was still assembling personnel when we detected the explosion. Someone intercepted our communication and sent Chen's people to your location. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. If their communication had been intercepted, then the compromise within the organization was even deeper than she had suspected. Chen wasn't working alone. He had accomplices with access to the highest levels of operational security. Sir, I need to go completely dark, Sarah said. Someone with administrative access is feeding information to hostile forces. I can't trust normal communication channels or extraction procedures. Agreed, Richardson replied. But I need you to know that Chen disappeared from the Montana safe house 6 hours ago. We found evidence that he's been passing operational intelligence to foreign contacts for at least 8 months. You're not just dealing with betrayal. You're dealing with a full espionage operation. Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest. Chen had been selling out American intelligence operations for months, and she had nearly been killed as part of his cover-up. How many other agents had been compromised? How many operations had been destroyed by his betrayal? What do you need me to do? Sarah asked, Disappear completely, Richardson said. Use your emergency protocols and stay off all communication systems until we can clean house internally. We're conducting a full investigation of everyone with access to your operational details. When it's safe to make contact, we'll use the Montana Sunrise Protocol. Sarah acknowledged the instructions and ended the call. She was now truly on her own, with no support from her organization and hostile forces still hunting her. The situation was as bad as it could possibly get, but Sarah had survived worse odds before. 3 weeks later, Sarah was working as a waitress in a small diner in Wyoming when she received a coded message through a classified advertisement in the local newspaper. The message used an encryption system that only Richardson and 2 other senior officials knew, confirming that the internal investigation had been completed. Sarah followed the instructions in the message to a meeting location in Denver, where Richardson was waiting with a small team of investigators. The reunion was emotional, but brief. There was too much work to be done to waste time on sentiment. We've identified the full scope of the compromise, Richardson explained as they sat in a secure conference room. Chen was working with 3 other agents to pass classified information to Chinese intelligence. They were using a sophisticated network that included compromised communication systems and corrupted personnel files. How long had it been going on? Sarah asked. At least 2 years, Richardson replied. Possibly longer. We're still assessing the damage to ongoing operations. At least 12 active agents had their identities compromised, and we've had to shut down operations in 4 countries. Sarah felt sick thinking about the other agents who had been betrayed. Some of them were people she had worked with, friends who had trusted the same systems, and people that had nearly gotten her killed. What about Chun? Sarah asked. Disappeared, Richardson said grimly. We raided his safe house in Montana the day after the gas station explosion, but he was already gone. His Chinese handlers probably extracted him when they realized the operation was blown. We may never see him again. Richardson handed Sarah a thick folder containing briefing materials and new operational protocols. We're rebuilding our internal security systems from the ground up, he explained. New communication procedures, new personnel screening, new operational protocols. What happened to you is never going to happen again. Sarah spent the next 6 months working with Richardson's investigation team to identify the full scope of the security breaches and help rebuild the intelligence infrastructure that had been compromised. It was tedious work, but necessary to ensure that other agents wouldn't face the same betrayal she had experienced. The investigation revealed that Chin's espionage network had been even more extensive than initially suspected. The group had compromised not just individual operations, but entire intelligence-gathering programs that had taken years to develop. The damage to American intelligence capabilities would take years to fully repair. But there were some victories amid the destruction. The investigation led to the identification of 3 additional foreign intelligence operatives working within other government agencies. The security improvements that resulted from Sarah's experience would make future espionage operations more difficult to conduct. Sarah was eventually cleared to return to active operations, but she requested a transfer to a different division. The betrayal had changed her perspective on the work and the people she had trusted. She remained committed to serving her country, but she would never again trust anyone completely. 6 months after her return to active duty, Sarah was conducting a routine surveillance operation in Miami when she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Chin was sitting at an outdoor cafe, apparently comfortable and confident in his new life. He looked older and was using a different name, but Sarah recognized him immediately. Sarah followed Chun at a distance, using the surveillance techniques that had kept her alive during their first encounter. This time, however, she wasn't interested in avoiding confrontation. Chen had betrayed her country and nearly gotten her killed. He had destroyed the careers of good people and compromised operations that had taken years to develop. Chen led her to a luxury apartment building in South Beach, where Sarah observed him entering a penthouse unit. She spent the next 3 days conducting surveillance of the building and its occupants, gathering intelligence about Chen's new life and his security arrangements. On the 4th night, Sarah made her move. She entered Chen's apartment through a balcony door that she had observed him leaving unlocked during his evening routine. Chen was sitting in his living room, reading financial reports on his laptop computer. "Hello, David," Sarah said as she stepped out of the shadows, her weapon trained on his chest. Chen looked up from his laptop with surprising calm. I wondered when you would find me, he said. I heard about the gas station. Very dramatic. You tried to have me killed, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the anger she felt. You betrayed everything we worked for. Chen shrugged with apparent indifference. I did what was necessary to survive. The Chinese offered me more money in 2 years than the agency would pay me in 20. It was a simple business decision. It was treason, Sarah replied. People died because of what you did. People die in this business anyway, Chen said. At least I made sure my family would be financially secure. Can you say the same about your dedication to the agency? Sarah studied Chen's face, looking for any sign of remorse or regret. There was none. He had betrayed his country and his colleagues for money, and he felt no guilt about the consequences of his actions. The agency thinks you disappeared into China, Sarah said. They have no idea you're living in Miami under a false identity. Chen's expression changed slightly, showing the first sign of concern. What do you want? Justice, Sarah replied simply. Sarah spent the next hour interrogating Chen about his espionage activities and the network of contacts he had used to pass classified information to foreign intelligence services. Chen provided detailed information, apparently hoping that cooperation would lead to leniency. The information Chen provided would help the agency identify and neutralize the remaining elements of the espionage network. It would also provide closure for Sarah and the other agents who had been betrayed by someone they had trusted with their lives. When the interrogation was complete, Sarah used Chen's secure communication system to contact Richardson and arrange for Chen's capture by a team of agents who were positioned outside the building. Chen would be returned to the United States to face trial for espionage and treason. As Sarah waited for the capture team to arrive, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The betrayal at Murphy's bar had nearly cost her life, but it had also led to the exposure of a major espionage operation and the capture of a traitor who had caused immeasurable damage to American intelligence capabilities. The experience had changed Sarah in ways that she was still discovering. She remained committed to her work, but she approached it with a deeper understanding of the human cost of intelligence operations and the importance of trust in relationships that could mean the difference between life and death. Chen was taken into custody without incident and transported back to the United States, where he would face the consequences of his betrayal. Sarah returned to her work, carrying with her the knowledge that she had survived one of the worst betrayals an intelligence officer could face and had emerged stronger for the experience. The woman who had walked into Murphy's bar that night had been confident in her training and her colleagues. The woman who walked out was someone who understood that survival sometimes required trusting no one but yourself, and that justice sometimes had to be pursued personally when the system failed. Sarah Martinez returned to active duty with a new appreciation for the complexity of her work and the importance of maintaining personal integrity in a world where betrayal could come from any direction. She had learned that survival required not just technical skills and physical training, but also the judgment to know when the people you trust most might be the ones trying to kill you. The attack at Murphy's bar had been intended to end her career and her life. Instead, it had made her into something more dangerous than her enemies had anticipated, an intelligence officer with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. In a profession where trust was a luxury and betrayal was always possible, Sarah Martinez had learned to rely on the one person she could always count on, herself.